What's going on, everybody? My name is Greg Peters. You are watching the Car Passion channel, and today I'm bringing you another fuel system upgrade video. Let me just show you the shiny bits first, and then I'll do some explaining afterwards. So what we've got here is a Radium Engineering aluminum fuel rail for the Miata 1.8, a Fuel Lab fuel pressure regulator, as well as a fuel pressure gauge, and some miscellaneous fittings. Listen, you know you guys are half the reason why I keep buying more expensive things for my car, right? Every time you see something stock in one of my videos, you're like, wait, you're gonna run a stock one of those? And then I don't sleep for 2 nights and I'm like, I gotta buy one of those. Let me play out a scenario that I've seen many times. People do a crazy engine build, they got a massive turbo in their car, they get it on the dyno, and they keep turning it up, and eventually they hit a certain power level, and their reasoning in their Instagram caption is, would've made more but ran out of fuel. So I'm thinking to myself, well, I don't want to get on the dyno and have something as small as that be the reason, after all this work, that I gotta wait 2 more weeks and do all these upgrades to go back to the dyno and try to make more power. So the concern that I had was not with the stock rail flowing enough fuel. It was more so at stock fuel pressure, because as you know, I have a 1.6 liter fuel pressure regulator, which base pressure is 43 PSI. And at 400 wheel horsepower on E85, 1000cc injectors might be close to their limit, you know, running a pretty high duty cycle at that level, possibly even running out of fuel. You know, every car's a little bit different, so I didn't want to get into that situation. Easy thing to do is add a fuel pressure regulator, the kind that goes right on the end of the rail. You bolt it on, done deal, they're like $100. The problem is most of them don't fit with the head being right there. You gotta like grind the head a little bit. So I wanted to upgrade to the Fuel Labs one, which is off the rail. The reason I want to use this rail, one of them is the Skunk 2 manifold exposes the fuel rail way more than a stock manifold. So this thing is gonna look sweet in there. It's gonna be like one of the first things you see in the engine bay. You pop the hood, bam. Second reason, which I think is actually a little bit more legitimate reason, is you got 4 ports that you can use for feed and return. So you can run your feed and return on the back of the rail, on the front of the rail. You can run a feed on one side, return on the other, both on the top. You can run dual feed. You have options. And since I'm adding multiple accessories that are gonna be in line with my fuel system, we got an ethanol content sensor and now an external fuel pressure regulator. I didn't want the lines to be crazy, going all over the place. With the stock fuel rail, I would have had a line going over the top of the Skunk 2 manifold and the other line coming out of the bottom of the rail right above the alternator with a plastic adapter fitting from Quick Disconnect, and it was just not gonna be a good situation. I didn't like it. So, okay, I balled out a little bit, but it's gonna be awesome. So the rail itself is just awesome quality, and like I said, you've got ports on the top and on the side there, and that goes for both ends of the rail. So you can run a variety of straight or angled fittings. And you can use both AN and standard barbed fittings, you know, depending on your fuel system. I'm just using barbed fittings and regular rubber fuel hose. I don't really feel the need to go to AN for any reason, so that's a straight fitting right there. And then you can also order it with these plugs. You got plenty of options when you order it, so you just block off the ports that you're not using. And it's got dual mounting points, so you can run it on your NA8 or NB engine. Now we got the Fuel Lab adjustable fuel pressure regulator. Now this thing has all kinds of ports and holes on it everywhere, so let me explain what everything's for. The one on the bottom here is your return to tank. So whatever type of fitting, whether it be a straight barb fitting like I'm using or AN, just goes in there like that. It's a AN6 size. Don't forget the O-ring on there when you do the official install. It does include the O-rings, but it does not include the fittings, so you'll have to buy your fittings separately. And then the side ports are the feeds from your fuel rail. So it goes from fuel rail to regulator to tank. Now you'll notice it's got 2, and that is in case you're running a V8 with dual fuel rails, you'll be able to feed them both into here. In my case, I'm just running a single fuel rail, so I will need an AN6 plug to go in here, which I didn't know about and I don't have, but I overnighted it so I could get one tomorrow and wrap the fuel system up. At any rate, you'll put another fitting in the side like that if you're running it Miata style like I am, so your finished product will look kind of like that. This is from the fuel rail, this goes to the fuel tank. There's also a small port on the front bottom part of the regulator, and that is in case you want to run a fuel pressure gauge. This is a nice little addition, also available from Fab 9. I think it's about 22 bucks. Worth it to me because how am I gonna know what my fuel pressure is without it? I'd have to get one of those AutoZone like inline fuel pressure testers, and who knows if it's gonna work, and I'm messing with fuel lines on the dyno, and I'm just not about it. But in case you don't want to run a fuel pressure gauge, Fuel Lab does include an NPT plug, so you can block off that port. Now spin it sideways. On the top you've got another port in there, and that is the vacuum reference port. This is another included fitting, and you'll hook manifold vacuum pressure up to this port here. On the back you got some mounting holes, and a little bracket is included so you can secure it to the firewall or wherever else you might want to put it. And then the top is where the actual adjustments are made. So it's got a little guy that threads in there and a lock nut. So when you want to adjust your pressure, you just loosen the lock nut. You can adjust that stud in the middle, and then you tighten the lock nut back up. And then with the gauge on there, if you choose to go with the optional gauge, you can watch your fuel pressure changing as you're making that adjustment. I want to set my base fuel pressure right away because I'm going to start street tuning the car as soon as I take it out, and if you change your base fuel pressure, you have to retune the car, so there's kind of no point in that. Now, an adjustable fuel pressure regulator raises your base fuel pressure. So if my 1000cc injectors run out of fuel at 380 horsepower at stock fuel pressure, and I raise that base fuel pressure, now my injectors will not be out of fuel at 380 horsepower. Raising the fuel pressure basically increases the horsepower limit of your injectors. And I know some of you are asking yourselves right now, well, can I use this on a stock ECU to run more boost on stock injectors? No, because the stock ECU expects the fuel pressure to be stock. If you raise it, you're gonna be dumping a lot of fuel when you don't need it. You might be able to get the car to run really good in boost, but then driving around, cruising, your fuel pressure is gonna be too high, you're gonna be running pig rich. You can't do it. That's why you need to run like a Vortec FMU, because it keeps the fuel pressure cruising stock, and then in boost raises it, so you get that extra fuel. So no, you cannot raise base fuel pressure on a stock ECU. You need an aftermarket ECU. Okay, let's get some of this stuff installed. Rail install is about as straightforward as the stock rail. You will reuse your stock rail spacers. And if you've got an NB, you'll use the mounting holes closest to the rail. If you've got an NA, you'll use the top mounting holes. And drop in the supplied Allen hardware with the little anti-scratch washers on it. These don't have to go super tight. It's a small bolt going into aluminum, so could be pretty easy to strip those threads. No need to go crazy on them. I can run my feed and return off the back of the rail instead of the front, so I can keep all the fuel stuff towards the back of the engine bay. So I'll install my first fitting, make sure the rubber O-ring is in place. Second one on the back there. And again, tightening an aluminum fitting into an aluminum rail, do not need a lot of torque. Just nice and snug. It's got a rubber sealing O-ring on there. And same deal at the front. Oh, well, that's poor planning. All right, car, you want to get tricky with me? Think about that. Got the regulator all hooked up with the fuel pressure gauge. On the back, I've got the mount already, and then I've got the vacuum port installed. Now, see, I've got some white stuff around the vacuum port and around the gauge. Make sure you're using thread sealant on anything that's NPT thread, anything that's just straight, you know, metal threads that doesn't have an O-ring. You're using that thread sealant because fuel leaks are bad, okay? Don't forget your O-rings on there before you put these fittings in. And yeah, tighten those down with a wrench. Not overkill, just tight enough to where they bottom out, get a little snug on them. I'm going to mount the regulator right here for a couple reasons. Number one, the ethanol sensor is directly below it, so I can run a fuel line right into the ethanol sensor. That'll work out perfect. And I'm also gonna run the catch can right next to it. How trick does that look? make sure you're getting a hose that's rated for the pressure you're going to be running, because a lot of fuel injection hose is max 50 psi, which on a stock car that's fine, but on my car I might be running 70 or more psi. I don't want a hose that is spec'd out at max 50. So I got some fuel injection hose. I think it's 100 psi, maybe even more. It's a little bit more expensive, but of course it's worth it when we're talking about a fuel system here. I also really like the fuel hose specific clamps versus just regular hose clamps. These are just designed to give you a little more clamping force and keep your very high pressure fuel inside of the fuel system. Alright, my return line is all done. I've got the hose dropping out of the bottom of the regulator. It's going into the ethanol content sensor, comes out of the content sensor over there, and then goes into the return line for the car. That goes back to the tank. Now, the ethanol content sensor can go in any part of the fuel system, but I strongly advise putting it in the return side. I don't know how restrictive the sensor is. It's probably not restrictive, but if you put it in the return side, it doesn't matter if it is. The feed side, you want to be as free-flowing as possible. Side note, if you run the GM ethanol content sensor, you will need a quick connect adapter, which adapts to a 5/16 fuel hose, and of course I will link those in the description. They look like this. You can get them in 90-degree and also straight adapters. All right, everything is hooked up now. The bottom line there is the feed line directly from the tank. That's going into the rail straight, uninterrupted. The return line from the rail coming off the back, along the firewall, and into the side of the regulator. Vacuum port on the top of the regulator is teed into a vacuum source. That's my Mega Squirt vacuum line there, which of course is hooked up to the manifold. If you go to the link in the description, I'll have a map of all this, so it'll make a little bit more sense that way. I know it's pretty much a complete mess right there now, so it's just chaos. But that rail looks real good right there. So that's the end of fuel video number 2, the final frontier, the final fuel tier, the final tears shed by my wallet, whatever you want to call it. Anyways, I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, what are you waiting for? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Join the fun. We're getting ready to start this thing very soon. I will see you in the next one, guys. Peace out.
Back from the dead.